The early history of central Appalachia is centered on the Cumberland Gap, the main natural gateway to the west through the mountains. Today's story is about one of the early explorers to reach the Cumberland Gap, Dr. Thomas Walker. Now, before we get started, make sure to subscribe by clicking that subscribe button down below and ding that bell too so you'll know when a new video comes out, whenever we release one. Also, we'd appreciate it if you'd share our stories with your friends at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, or wherever you hang out online.
You know, Steve, when we talk about Cumberland Gap is one of three portals, if you want to call it that, through the Appalachians in order for settlers to be able to go west. One of those, of course, surprised a lot of people, but the Breaks was one of them in Kentucky. Then Pound Gap, which it borders Virginia and Kentucky.
Right.
But the one that's most famous is Cumberland Gap, which actually is toward the end of Virginia into Tennessee and a little bit over into Kentucky as well. So it's a super gateway, so to speak, for all these settlers to be able to go west and move west.
And it's the easiest route as well. Now, I've walked
Right.
over the Cumberland Gap. It's if an old fat man like me can do it, anybody can do it, to be quite honest with you. But it was a nice little hike. They have taken the road that used to be there, taken that out, returned it back to the trail that it used to be, and turned it into like a hiking path, kind of like it was back when Daniel Boone led the first settlers through there.
Wow.
It's a nice day hike. If an old fat man like me can make it over there, anybody can do it. It's a gentle little walk up over the hills and then back down to the other side. So if you get a chance, you need to go do that. In fact, when I went over there, I did get some video from over there. We're going to be using that a bit on today's podcast as a little background. So
give the people a great idea of what Cumberland Gap looks like. Some people I know have already been there, but for some people that have not, it's a great way to kind of get an understanding of the way the land lays and, kind of the land that surrounds everything.
That's right. So are you ready to roll?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. Rye Field was a plantation in Walkerton, which is in the Tidewater section of Virginia in King and Queen County. And Rye Field was owned by the folks for whom Walkerton was named, the Walker family. On January 25th, 1715, a boy was born to the Walker family, and he was named Thomas. Now, Thomas Walker was raised as an Englishman, as best as was possible in the colonies, and received a fine education at the College of William and Mary, which allowed him to become a physician. And it's as Dr. Thomas Walker that most people in central Appalachia know him.
Well, Dr. Walker, Steve, married a widow, Mildred Thornton, thus giving him a large portion of her late husband's estate. Now, there, they built their own plantation and also their home, and they called it Castle Hill, and they raised 12 of their children. Walker served as a delegate to Virginia in the House of Burgesses from Albemarle County and was a trustee of Charlottesville. He was a well-respected member of the Virginia gentry, and he was also a land speculator.
Well, on July 12th, 1749, Walker helped to found the Loyal Land Company along with Peter Jefferson, Joshua Fry, James Morey, and Thomas Meriwether, tasked with gaining title to lands to the west. Now, the company received a royal grant of 800,000 acres of land in southeastern Kentucky, and that land had to be explored and surveyed before it could be sold. Time was of the essence, too, because the royal grant required the land to be settled within 4 years. So in 1750, the company appointed Dr. Walker as the man to lead an expedition west to survey that land.
Well, this wasn't the first time that Walker had traveled to the far west. In 1748, he led an expedition as far west as present-day Kingsport and Kingsport, Tennessee, along the Holston River, which he referred to as the Fork Country of the Holston. Walker set off on his journey on March 7th, 1750. Now, the weather was a bit unsettled the day he left, so the expedition was slow going at first, but the pace soon picked up, and the group reached the New River by March 13th. There, the men stayed on the low grounds of the property of one Adam Beard. Walker kept a journal and recorded that night's lodgings this way.
Now, Rod, I could read this, but you have the better British accent.
Oh, please.
So
Okay,
I'm
well,
going to allow you to take the honors on this one.
we'll give it a shot. It may not be the best British accent in the world, but we'll give it a shot. But anyway, Beard is an ignorant, impotent, brutish fellow, and would have taken us up had it not been for a reason easily to be suggested.
On the men went, trading for food and supplies as they went with the early pioneers in Appalachia. At one place, Walker noted that,
The land is such that an industrious man might make 100 barrels of share in a seasonable year.
now, folks, he was talking about growing corn, by the way, and what that corn could be made into. Enough said.
Yeah, I
Now,
think that's good right there, Steve.
he met some religious sects too, including the Dunkards along the New River, whom he described as follows.
The Dunkards are an odd set of people who make it a matter of religion not to shave their beards, lie on beds, or eat flesh, though at present in the last they transgress, being constrained to it, they say, by the want of sufficiency of grain and roots. They have not been long seated here. I doubt the plenty of deliciousness of the venison and turkeys has contributed not a little to this. The unmarried have no property, but live on a common stock. They don't baptize either young or old. They keep the Sabbath on Saturday, and hold that all men shall be happy hereafter, but first must pass through punishment according to their sins. They are very hospitable.
By March 21st, they reached Reedy Creek, which runs into the Holston River in Kingsport. From there, they traveled down Reedy Creek to the river, then followed the river, where they found the tracks of Indians and eventually a Cherokee settlement along the North Fork of the Holston. There, they noticed an abundance of perch, mullet, carp, and catfish, one of which they caught and ate. I don't know which one, the catfish, the carp, the perch, or the mullet, but they caught one and they ate it. On they continued to the northwest, eventually reaching and crossing the Clinch River, pulling a raft with their equipment and goods across. They continued on over Clinch Mountain and down to Turkey Creek and up the creek to a river, along which he discovered some coal on the riverbank.
On April 13th, the men came upon the most important mountain pass in American history. Dr. Walker described the event in his journal. We went 4 miles to Lodge Creek, where we called Cedar Creek, being a branch of Bear Grass, and from thence 6 miles to Cave Gap, the land being level. On the north side of the gap is a large spring which falls very fast, and just above the spring is a small entrance to a large cave which the spring runs through, and there's a constant stream of cool air issuing out. The spring is sufficient to turn a mill. Just at the foot of the hill is a laurel thicket, and the spring water runs through it. On the south side is a plain Indian road. On the top of the ridge are laurel trees marked with crosses, others blazed with several figures on them. As I went down to the other side, I soon came to some laurel in the head of the branch. A beech stands on the left hand, on which I cut my name. This gap may be seen at a considerable distance, and that there is no other that I know of except of one about 2 miles to the north of it, which does not appear to be so low as to the other. The mountain on the north side of the gap is very steep and rocky, but on the south side it is not so. We called it Steep Ridge. At the foot of the hill on the northwest side, we came to a branch that made a great deal of flat land. We kept it down 2 miles, several other branches coming into, making it a large creek, which we called Flat Creek. We camped on the bank, where we found some very good coal. I did not see any limestone beyond this ridge. We rode about 13 miles this day.
Now, you know that cave that he saw that was up above a spring?
Yeah, I remember mentioning that in there, the
Yeah.
discussion about it. I'm trying to figure out where that would be at
Oh,
specifically,
you
Steve.
you know that cave. You may have even been there as a little boy. That was Cudjoe's cave.
Cudjoe's, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, now there we go.
Yeah, and you can stand there and look down and see the spring, and the path that they've got cut across there goes right across that spring, and it flows
Right.
all the time. In fact, they've got a little footbridge you can get on if you don't want to get your feet wet and walk around it to get through on that trail.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now that you mentioned it, it does. The description of it, that comes right back to what it is. You're right.
Yeah, they call it the Gap Cave now, but yeah,
Right.
Cudjoe's is what it was called for years. And
Mhm.
do you want to know why they call it Cudjoe's?
Go ahead. I think I know, but let's tell everybody that's out there that's watching.
In 1864, there was a novel written called Cudjoe's Cave.
Right.
In that novel, it told a story about an escaped slave who made it to the Gap Cave, which they call Cudjoe's Cave in the story,
Hmm.
where he hid out from slave hunters
Hmm.
and managed to make his way out of there and hit his way north. That's where the name Cudjoe's Cave came from.
Mm.
And that's obviously where the name Cudjoe's, the gift shop across the street from the cave,
Right.
got its name as well.
Right. Well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here a little bit later on here in the podcast. But wow, interesting stuff there, Steve.
Yeah, well, let's get back to Dr. Walker's expedition because he's only barely into the gap, okay?
Yeah, you're right.
Well, Walker continued his explorations in what's now Kentucky, discovering coal and iron ore deposits and the Cumberland River, which he named for Prince William, Duke of Cumberland, hero of the Battle of Culloden. Now, this name soon spread to other natural features in the area, including the Cumberland Mountains and that cave gap he went through, now known worldwide as the Cumberland Gap. Now, among the men traveling with Dr. Walker was Ambrose Powell, for whom another river they discovered on this expedition was named, along with the valley it forms, the Powell River and Powell Valley.
Hmm. Yeah, and we also need to say too, the Powell Valley runs for a very long way from Virginia on down into Tennessee. So I mean, it's a very wide spanning valley through there that a lot of people lay claim to, but it's a beautiful valley too. There's no other valley like it, just anywhere around here. It's just beautiful. Well, the group also built the first non-Indian house built in Kentucky, a log cabin, a replica of which is on display at the Dr. Thomas Walker State Historic Site near Barbersville, Kentucky. Now, Walker returned to his home later that year with a wealth of information about the area and about the western lands of the Loyal Land Company. Dr. Walker met many Native Americans during his travels and became influential in dealing with those tribes. He was appointed to represent Virginia at the Treaty of Fort Stanwix and the Treaty of Lochaber in 1770 and was involved in the peace negotiations after the Battle of Point Pleasant. In 1775, Walker was also involved in negotiations with the Iroquois, trying to get them to ally themselves with the new United States in the American Revolution.
In 1779, at the age of 64, Dr. Walker again returned west to survey the border between the western lands of Virginia, now Kentucky, and North Carolina, now Tennessee. He surveyed the border as a straight line to the Tennessee River, which now forms the boundary between Tennessee and Kentucky, with a few modifications here and there up to where the Tennessee River crosses into Kentucky on its way to the Ohio. Dr. Walker also served as an advisor to the son of one of his old Loyal Land Company partners, Thomas Jefferson, as he wrote his book, Notes on the State of Virginia, published in 1785. And Thomas Walker died on November 9th, 1794, at his home at Castle Hill.
Steve, you mentioned a couple of names back there early on in our story as we were talking about this. Of course, you mentioned a Jefferson, so that kind of answered the question right there. But James Merriweather, any relation per se to one of the explorers that we would come to know as are kind of like a name influenced in Meriwether Lewis and Lewis and Clark, something like that?
To be honest, I don't really know right offhand.
Just an interesting name right there, James Merriweather, and it kind of caught my fancy. I wondered if it might be something to do with one of those explorers or not, but still, this is just fascinating hearing the story about Thomas Walker coming in and making such detailed notes about the land and how it ran and all the different features about it. And it's almost like, very similar to the way Daniel Boone did things as well, when they were exploring. But Thomas Walker was a little bit more in detail about what he was looking at and looking for.
Well, this was one of the early explorations in Western Appalachia. Although not the earliest, there have been a few, before that. But he really kind of blazed the way, at least through the Cumberland Gap and on into Kentucky for folks like Daniel Boone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, folks, that is the story of Dr. Thomas Walker, early explorer of Appalachia, another part of the history of this place we call home. Thanks for listening. Till next we meet. So long, everybody.